Hi, this podcast is brought to you by Ignition from Inductive Automation. This is Gary Minchell and another Gary on Manufacturing, thoughts on technology and business in the world of manufacturing. I'm catching up on my podcast versus my travels, which is difficult because I was gone like 3 weeks in a row, and I'm just barely catching up this week before I take off for another 3 weeks in a row. No, actually, it's 3 out of 4 weeks, but that's okay. I'm on the road. It's fall. What can I say? This one is this is a recap of Emerson Automation and their Emerson Global Users Exchange conference in Minneapolis. Interesting choice. I don't know that I've ever been to a conference in Minneapolis. Nice city, as long as it's not January. But actually, a lot of it could be indoors. But it was a good city, nice experience. And if you're going to talk anything about Emerson and listen to their explanations, the first thing you're going to hear is what top quartile experience. So what's happening is they've done a lot of research on performers and like lower performers, higher performers, and so on. And what do the top 25% of performers do? How do they act? What do they buy? How do they implement it? How do they work together? And all this sort of stuff. So a lot of talking going on about top quartile performance. And we heard from Mike Train, who's the president, I think he's called executive president of the Emerson Automation Group. There's been some reorg at Emerson. It's no longer called Emerson Process Management. And so you get used to that. And they've actually broadened. So my friend Jim Cahill, who is chief blogger and has been involved with me in social media for a long time now, actually went to PAC Expo. It was a whole new experience for a chemical engineer used to things like oil and gas to go to a conference or a trade show that was all machines that kind of go click-clack and things like that. So big changes at Emerson, which is it's all to the good. They're one of the few companies I'm working with or I deal with that is growing and expanding and investing. So top quartile experience and performance is a big thing at Emerson. They talk about automation as a driver of value. We need to think about how we add value to our corporation, not so much just automating or a KPI or how this process is doing a little bit more efficiently than it used to before. We're really more concerned with adding value to the corporation, and Emerson has picked up on that language and is doing quite a bit along that line. Digital transformation is another term. I've been playing with a pun off of a rock song. And, does anybody really know what digital transformation is? Does anybody really care? The time must be 25 or 6 to 4. But anyway, moving along, they talked about digital transformation, and there are 5 basic competencies they talked about, which included automated workflow, decision support, workforce upskilling, they called it. In other words, we all know, I hope, that we need to be training our workforce, continually training our workforce. This is something you don't do just once and then let it go. It's something that needs to be continually done. Another competency is mobility. We all know we're all carrying things like this and iPads and so on, even in factories anymore. And that debate is over, long gone. Whether or not we should do it, it's happening. And the other thing is change management, and it's always been a problem. I remember I was kind of a walking one-man change management at a company I worked for 40 years ago, I think. So anyway, that's more and more and more important as we track changes and actually think about the changes we need to make. They threw a lot of stuff at us. They did have an end user speak. His name was Tom Madilau. He was from Singapore, and he works for a company called Chevron Oronite. And he was talking about Internet of Things, and he had 2 points to make on Internet of Things. 2 things that he has implemented and that they use and successfully. One is ID tags, RFID tags, and so on employees. He's at a process plant, a big plant, and it's really important to know if somebody's in an area. And so he's implemented what they call an Internet of Things project to tag people so that they can know if someone is in an unsafe area. If there's an incident, they know where someone is and they can rescue if need be or whatever it might be. And the other thing he's implemented is a series of wireless sensors on steam traps, and it's a product that Emerson talked about last year. And a lot of energy is wasted with leaky steam traps. And so there are some cool little, not too expensive sensors, and with a wireless communication that can go back and can be monitored and send alerts to maintenance to go do whatever kind of repair or anything that's needed on steam traps and save a, how many steam traps do you have in a big plant? How much energy could you save? What does that relate to in cost? A lot. So anyway, it's very interesting to talk about that. Later on, we had a panel discussion that Tom was on, and he talked about justifying projects like that, and he talked about doing small proof of concept projects like this with a defined end game, a defined benefit, and then not spending a lot of money, but proving the concept out, and then management is more willing to spend more money to invest in such things again. There were a lot of people, by the way, at as typical at an Emerson Global Users Exchange, a lot of energy and enthusiasm, a lot of hallway conversations. Always a great place to be. I'm looking at my notes, which there were manifold. There's a lot of notes here, but at any rate, probably the best thing I could bring back is a few comments from the panel discussion on Internet of Things. First off, every time I go to a conference like this and there's an Internet of Things session, it's packed. And this one was packed and been very, very good. Even though I'm not a fan of panels so much, because usually each one speaks and things can drag. But Mike Boudreau kept this one moving along very nicely. And we'll talk about a couple of things. One was how do you justify projects? And talking about that, they kind of talked about this idea of a small thing, like Tom talked about, or Peter Zornio talked about, doing a project with a defined benefit, something that is clearly defined what you're going to do. It's going to save some energy, reduce some energy, for example, or something like that, where you can actually see the results, you can measure the results. It's not up for discussion or argument or anything. You can say, hey, I said that we could reduce electric usage. Like one time I sold a variable frequency drive, and it was based on energy usage. And when my customer turned it on, and I programmed it and everything, and we got it going, and he knew the pump was on by looking at an amp meter, and it was usually pegged over, and he turned it on, and the amp meter didn't go very far. He says, Gary, what'd you do to me? I said, well, check the motor. It's running, right? Yeah, it's right. Okay. I told you I'd save you electricity. I'd reduce your electricity usage, and there you go. Oh, gee, that's cool. And so pick things like that are easily done, and you can prove it, and then you can expand on that success. Now you know how to implement it. You know how to sell it. You know how to calculate payback and so on. One of the main things they talked about. Somebody asked the panel discussion at the end, I got kids, and they're going to go off to college, and what should I teach them to program? And the thing that came back, and I don't know what you're thinking in terms of teaching your kids how to program, but these days it's not necessarily C Sharp, or something like that. They were talking about better learn Python. We had a lot of web-based stuff, right? So we learned Python, JSON, JSON, JSON. R is a language for working in analytics, very important. Probably Node.js is another very useful thing. And then one of the guys on the panel threw out bots. Should learn how to use and apply bots. And bots are getting to be pretty interesting these days also. And then the last thing, we took a tour of a new plant that Emerson has built in the suburbs of Minneapolis in Shakopee, and they have made a significant investment, $10 million, they said, on this training. It's on a training facility, and it's a real-life training facility with a couple of tanks and a few other things. There's air, but there's no live steam or there's no live chemicals or anything. Students can go into a classroom, which is right up there, like on the second floor, and study something about tuning of a loop or a processor, whatever it might be, or working with a certain kind of valve or a certain kind of instrument. And then they can go out, and to go out there, they need to put on the steel-toed shoe, safety shoe things, and a hard hat and safety glasses, just as if they're going into a plant, walk out, and then go around and actually do the work on that training demo facility. They have one in Shakopee, they have one in, I believe they said Charlotte, North Carolina, another one under construction or about to, I believe, in Houston, and others in the planning stage. Significant investment in training. Remember, one of their key competency things was workforce upskilling, so they're working on that and actually investing money in what they're actually talking about, which is very interesting. The whole building is cool. They have a huge, like a collaboration conference room that with a big wall of displays that can be configured in many ways, kind of like you might see on I think on a TV news thing, or maybe on Weather Channel. I've seen those. I don't watch much TV news, but they get those walls and you can move your hands and so on. And they're doing some of that. A lot of investment, a really good thing. So anyway, that was my trip to Minneapolis and Emerson Automation now, and they are moving along, making investments, acquiring smaller companies, and so on. And I see a lot more activity there than I'm seeing in their competitors right now. Although ABB is picking up some stuff, but ABB is a larger conglomerate in many different directions, and that's kind of interesting. But as far as in process automation and the things that Emerson is doing, they're being very active, investing money, and I would assume picking up some extra business that way. Anyway, this is Gary Minchell talking about manufacturing and technology, and this podcast, as always, is brought to you by Ignition from Inductive Automation.